Welcome, Thrillseekers. From unexplained insect invasions to chilling events that defy all logic. These stories are the best of Morpheus's discoveries, a collection of the unexplained and the uncanny, guaranteed to linger in your mind long after the video ends. Brace yourself as we step into the unknown. These are the best of Morpheus.
Lena loved her cozy apartment in the city. It was small but perfect, filled with houseplants, books, and the occasional candle that lent a soft glow to her evenings. She'd lived there for just over a year and felt a sense of peace that she'd never known before. One evening, as she prepared for bed, Lena noticed a single ant scurrying across her kitchen counter. She squished it with a tissue and thought nothing of it. The next morning, there were more, tiny black dots moving purposefully across the countertop. She followed their trail to a small crack in the wall, just beneath the window. Mildly irritated, she sealed the crack with some putty, hoping that would solve the problem. Days passed, and Lena began to notice more insects. It wasn't just ants anymore. There were spiders in the corners of her ceiling, cockroaches skittering across the floor at night, and beetles clinging to the walls. She tried sprays, traps, and even called an exterminator, but nothing seemed to work. The insects kept coming, multiplying, their presence growing more menacing by the day. The next night, as Lena lied in bed, she heard a faint rustling sound. She turned on her bedside lamp and saw a cockroach on her nightstand. Disgusted, she grabbed a book and smashed it. But as she laid back down, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The rustling continued, now joined by a soft buzzing that seemed to come from the walls. Lena's sleep became restless, filled with dreams of insects crawling over her skin. She woke frequently, always feeling the phantom tickle on her arms and legs. Every morning, she found more evidence of the infestation. Droppings, dead insects, and occasionally live ones in her sink or bathtub. She called the exterminator again, pleading for a more thorough treatment. The man arrived with an arsenal of chemicals and spent hours fumigating the apartment. For a while, it seemed to help. The rustling stopped, and Lena began to sleep soundly again. But it didn't last. While watering, Lena noticed something strange about her plants. The leaves were riddled with holes, and small black beetles scurried over the soil. She tried to shake them off, but they clung stubbornly. She could almost hear them chittering, a sound that set her teeth on edge. At night, the buzzing returned, louder this time. Lena turned on every light in the apartment, hoping to drive the insects away. But when she did, she saw them. Ants marching in lines along the walls, spiders spinning webs in the corners, and cockroaches skittering across the floor. She could even see small, dark shapes moving behind the wallpaper. Panic set in. Lena tried to grab her phone to call for help, but it was covered in the insects that were pouring into the apartment. She checked the charger, the outlets, but nothing seemed to work. The lights began to flicker, casting eerie shadows that danced and writhed like living things. Lena's breath came in shallow gasps as she realized the insects were everywhere, their dark forms a living, moving carpet. She rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. She pulled and yanked, but it felt as though something on the other side was holding it shut. The buzzing grew louder, and Lena felt a sharp sting on her ankle. She looked down to see a swarm of ants biting into her skin. Their small bodies relentless and fierce. Lena screamed, the sound swallowed by the overwhelming noise of the insects. She stumbled back, tripping over her own feet and falling to the floor. The insects swarmed over her, their tiny bodies filling her mouth, her nose, her ears. She clawed at her face, trying to rid herself of them, but it was no use. They were inside her, filling her lungs, choking her. As darkness closed in, Lena's last thought was a desperate wish for escape, for freedom from the nightmare that had consumed her home and her life. But the insects had won, their relentless advance unstoppable. In the morning, the apartment was quiet. The sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the tidy room. A single ant crawled across the kitchen counter, unnoticed and undisturbed.
Henry was new to the job. Hired as a temp worker, he was filling in for the regular janitor who recently left without notice. The old building downtown was his responsibility, and after several training shifts with the day shift janitor, tonight was his first solo shift. The layout was a sprawling maze of beige walls, fluorescent lights, and empty cubicles. The company had moved out months ago, leaving behind an eerie silence that unnerved him. As Henry moved methodically from room to room, cleaning and tidying up, he noticed a door he was certain he hadn't seen during his training shifts. It was unmarked and slightly ajar, tucked away at the end of a seldom-used hallway in the basement. Curiosity got the better of him. Pushing the door open, he peered inside. The room beyond looked like every other part of the office. Beige walls, stained carpets, and a flickering fluorescent light casting an unsettling glow. But something felt different. The air was heavy. The silence was deafening. He took a step inside, intending to make a quick inspection before returning to his duties. As he wandered further, he started to feel as though the corridor stretched on endlessly. The layout was confusing, hallways branching off in unexpected directions. Henry took a mental note of his path, confident he could find his way back. Minutes turned to hours as he explored the maze of identical hallways, each filled with drab, outdated office furniture and endless rows of cubicles. The monotonous design played tricks on his mind, making it impossible to tell if he was making any progress. Desks cluttered with old papers, flickering computer monitors, and the occasional broken chair filled the space, giving it a sense of long-forgotten abandonment. As he ventured deeper, his curiosity began to wane, replaced by a growing sense of unease. The lights flickered more violently in some areas, and he could swear he saw something moving from the corner of his eye. He heard faint whispers and distant footsteps, though he knew he was alone. The silence was punctuated only by the occasional groan of the building, or was it something else? Determined to find a way out, Henry started marking his path with a piece of chalk he found in one of the cubicles. But with each cycle through the hallways, the rooms began to change. The walls grew darker, the carpets more stained, and the furniture more decrepit. The lights flickered more intensely, casting shadows that seemed to dance and writhe with malevolent intent. As he continued, the changes became more pronounced. The walls began to crack. The mold crept along the edges, filling the air with a musty, decaying smell. The office furniture was now broken and scattered, and the old papers on the desk were yellow and brittle, disintegrating at his touch. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, though no one was there. Desperation began to knot Henry's resolve. He had to find an exit, any exit. But the back room seemed to stretch on forever, an endless maze designed to trap its victims. With each new rendition, the environment grew more nightmarish. The lights above flickered erratically, and the buzzing noise grew louder, almost unbearable. Finally, he stumbled upon a room that looked different from the others, filled with a putrid stench, and in the center lay the remains of another janitor. His uniform tattered, his face contorted in a final expression of terror. The realization hit Henry like a physical blow. These were the remains of his predecessor, and this was his fate. The silence was now a growing number of distant noises, making it clear he was utterly alone. Henry sank to the floor, his mind a whirl of terror and despair. The backrooms had claimed him, just as they had claimed others. There was no escape. The empty work building had become his prison, and he was destined to wander its haunted halls forever, a prisoner of the shadows. The Aurora Grand Theater stood as a majestic relic of a bygone era, its facade a tapestry of intricate carvings in time-worn marble. Built in the early 1900s, the theater was once the heart of the city's cultural scene, hosting opulent premieres and glamorous stars. Despite its faded glory, the theater still held a certain allure, drawing in those who had yearned for the taste of old-world charm. One summer evening, Zoe and Jake, a couple with a love for vintage cinemas, decided to visit the Aurora Grand. They had heard rumors of the theater's past, stories of secret passageways and strange occurrences. Intrigued, they purchased tickets for a classic film screening and entered the grand lobby, its old lights casting a golden hue over the ornate decor. "Isn't it beautiful?" Zoe whispered, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the rich velvet drapes and the intricate patterns adorning the walls. "Absolutely," Jake agreed, squeezing her hand. "It's like stepping back in time." As they settled into their plush seats, the theater's lights dimmed and the screen flicked to life. Halfway through the film, Zoe whispered to Jake that she would be right back and slipped out of her seat, making her way towards the ladies' room. The hallway leading to the restroom was long and narrow, lined with vintage movie posters that seemed to watch her as she passed. Upon reaching the restroom, Zoe was struck by its charm. It was a small, circular room with walls covered in antique mirrors, each one reflecting the warm glow of the decorative lamps. She finished her business quickly, eager to return to Jake in the movie. However, as she stepped out, she noticed something strange. The hallway she had come from seemed to have vanished, replaced by a series of narrow corridors that branched off in different directions. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing off the walls. There was no response, only the silence of the empty corridors. Determined to find her way back, Zoe chose a corridor at random and began to walk. As she moved deeper into the passageways, she began to panic. The walls were lined with more mirrors, each reflecting endless images of herself, creating an illusion of infinite space. She turned corner after corner, but the layout made no sense, twisting and turning in impossible ways. After what felt like hours, Zoe stumbled upon a room that took her breath away. It was an old dressing room, lavishly decorated with red velvet and gold trim. The mirrors here were different, larger and more ornate, each one framed with delicate carvings of flowers and vines. She looked into one of the mirrors, and something caught her eye, a figure standing just behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. Her heart raced as she realized she was not alone. The shape appeared again, this time in a different mirror, its face obscured by darkness. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The figure did not respond, but instead moved closer, its intimidating presence growing with each step. Zoe backed away, her fear rising. She tried to find an exit, but the room seemed to have no doors, only mirrors. Just as she was about to give up hope, she noticed a small box on the vanity table in the corner of the room. She opened it and found an old key, its surface tarnished with age. She tore the room apart, looking for a lock that might fit the key. She discovered a hidden panel on the wall behind one of the mirrors. She inserted the key and turned it, and the panel creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down. Zoe hurried down the stairs, feeling the rush of cool air push towards her as she descended. The staircase led her to a hidden exit at the back of the theater. She burst out into the night, gasping for air. Zoe made her way to the front of the theater after taking a moment. Outside, Jake was waiting, his face filled with relief. "Zoe, you're okay. I was looking everywhere for you. Where were you?" She threw herself into his arms, trembling. "I got lost in the theater. There was something in there with me. I can't even explain what it was." Jake held her close, vowing to not let her out of his sight again. As they walked away from the theater, Zoe glanced back one last time. She thought she saw a shadowy figure standing at the entryway, its face hidden in the shadows. She shivered and turned away, determined to leave the theater and its mysteries behind forever. It began like any other night. The man didn't remember falling asleep. He only knew that one moment he was lying in his bed, and the next, he was somewhere else entirely. He stood on a street that stretched endlessly, paved with stones that shimmered as though the stars themselves had been pulled down from the sky. Above him, the sky was broken, cracked like a shattered mirror, each fracture revealing glimpses of strange landscapes beyond. In one shard, there was a blood-red sea boiling under a black sun. In another, colossal creatures moved through forests of spires, too distant to be fully understood. Colors bled and shifted across these fragments, casting strange hues onto the ground below. The air was unnaturally still, the silence so thick it pressed against his ears. There was no wind, no sound, only his own breathing. At the end of the street, a tall, shadowy figure stood motionless. It was human-like, but wrong, its limbs too long, its posture unnaturally stiff. The figure's head was turned toward the fractured sky in an almost impossible way, its face obscured by the darkness, but two glowing eyes burned from within the shadow. The man felt an urge, a pull, to move toward it. Something deep in him told him to run the other way, but his legs betrayed him, moving forward against his will. Each step felt heavy, like wading through water, but still, he moved closer. As he approached, the world around him began to distort. The once solid street began to crumble, its stone shards rising up towards the fractured sky. The figure remained still, watching as the cracks spread wider, as if the very fabric of reality was tearing apart in front of him. "You shouldn't be here," the figure spoke, though its mouth did not move. The voice echoed inside the man's mind, a cacophony of whispers that made him feel as though his skull might split. "I don't know how I got here," the man replied, though his words came out as thoughts, not sounds. The figure's eyes glowed brighter. "You are between. This place was never meant for you." The cracks in the sky began to widen, the gaps between realities growing larger. Through them, the man could see things. Terrifying, impossible things. A city, blackened and dead, twisting towers stretching to a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. A desert made of glass, where creatures of smoke and shadow walked freely. Each shard revealed a different world, a different horror. The man's mind struggled to comprehend the enormity of what he was seeing. "You must leave," the figure said, its voice becoming louder in his mind. The sky is breaking. But the man could not move. The street beneath him had vanished, leaving him standing on nothing but empty air. The building that once lined the street had collapsed into themselves, folding into grotesque shapes before being swallowed by fractures in the sky. His heart pounded in his chest, panic clawing at his throat, but still, his feet remained rooted in place. The figure moved toward him, gliding silently across the crumbling landscape. As it drew near, the man could feel its presence, a cold, ancient thing, like the weight of time pressing down upon him. "The sky will devour you," the figure whispered, its voice a hiss now, close enough that the man could feel it vibrating in his bones. In a sudden rush of clarity, the man tore his gaze away from the figure and forced his legs to move. He turned and ran, through the street that had long since disappeared, leaving him stumbling through a void of swirling colors and collapsing worlds. His breath came in, sharp and painful as he fled, but no matter how far he ran, the fractures in the sky followed. They spread faster, wider, threatening to swallow him whole. He screamed, but there was no sound. The figure's voice still echoed in his mind, repeating over and over, "The sky will devour you." As the last piece of sky shattered above him, he fell. He tumbled into the void, the world around him disintegrating into nothingness. And then, he woke up. The man shot upright in bed, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. He was home. The familiar shapes of his bedroom greeted him in the dim light of dawn. The terror faded, but only slightly. He looked out the window. His blood ran cold. He wasn't sure if the sky outside was still fractured, with strange lights shimmering just beyond the horizon. The man didn't even notice someone standing off in the distance. A figure, its glowing eyes fixed on him. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the chills, like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Stay vigilant. The unknown is always closer than you think.